Hello, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of Behind the Bars, the trial of Diddy coverage. A lot has transpired today. We opened up yesterday with the first day of jury selection. That is ongoing this week. Judge Arun Subramanian wants to seat the jury by Wednesday of this week in the hopes and the anticipation of starting with opening arguments next week. So jury selection has been going apace. We're getting lots of stories coming out of the courtroom about various colloquies with potential jurors about whether or not they can serve on this jury. Some interesting ones that I wanted to sort of touch upon briefly were a couple of one juror said they had some medical issues, that they couldn't sit through a trial because they needed to go to the bathroom too frequently, and that would be disruptive. There was actually a little bit of an exchange with the judge saying, well, can you sit through a movie? Because we'll have breaks periodically. And I thought this was instructive. I wanted to talk to you briefly about it because the judge has to press on these initial sort of invitations to be dismissed from the jury. And the reason they press on it is they've got to get 18 people who can sit. And if you were just able to say, hey, I use the bathroom frequently, can I get out of here? The judge would never be able to seat a jury because this is in front of everyone else, and other jurors would just say, oh, I just say I have a small bladder and I'll get out of this.
Also, we have no idea about this particular person, but people lie. That's just the reality of it. People make stuff up to get out of jury duty. It happens all the time. Other people, as we've talked about, make stuff up in order to get on the jury because they want to be part of such a big case.
Right.
It may be lucrative for them at the tail end of it. But people lie to get out of jury duty all the time. Every single panel of juries, you have multiple people who just tell falsities in order to get out of jury duty. The judge has to push back, saying, I'm not going to let you get away with that. I'm going to require some level of proof or evidence to suggest that you can't actually sit through this.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, what this jury is going to be comprised of is a compromise of who the defense and the prosecution can live with as jurors. There were some more serious issues that were brought up. Someone thought Diddy was so rich he could, quote, buy his way out of trouble, so there were some cause challenges there. You're going to see a lot of this transpire, and they're going to all take this general shape. But Jason and I wanted to switch gears a bit because jury selection is just going to move along. Eventually, they are going to be able to find the 12 people they sit on this jury plus the 6 alternates. We wanted to talk about what's coming up, and that really revolves around the 2 teams that are facing off against each other. We've got the prosecution, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, against Diddy's defense team. And obviously, he is a very well-heeled individual with a lot of money. He has assembled a super team of lawyers. But let's start with the prosecution. And before we get into that, Jason's going to tell you sort of how this all works in a criminal case.
So just going to run through this quickly, but I think it's important to give some sort of structure to the entire process. So just so we know, there's 94 federal districts in the United States, anywhere from 1 in small states like Wyoming or Alaska, up to 4 in really populous states like California, Texas, New York. Each of these districts is headed by a single U.S. attorney, and that person, those 94 of those people, answer directly to the U.S. attorney, the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, who in turn answers only to the president.
These are like the Attorney General's deputies, essentially.
That's right. And then each of the U.S. attorneys has a team of people called Assistant U.S. Attorneys, AUSAs, and they are the prosecutors. They're the ones that actually march into court day in and day out and try cases all across the country. Federal cases, there's obviously an entire state law regimen that happens that every state has its own superior courts, and those superior courts are manned by prosecutors. This is the federal system.
And the Southern District of New York is the famous one.
Yeah, so Diddy is being prosecuted in the Southern District of New York, which is located in Manhattan. It is far and away, as Derek was alluding to, the most prestigious federal district court in the country, and it is staffed by the very best prosecutors. There are other prestigious postings. The Central District of California has Los Angeles, the Northern District of Illinois, where Chicago is, the District of D.C. is very prestigious, but all of them pale by comparison to the Southern District of New York. All that means that Diddy, who is alleged to have committed many of his crimes in Manhattan, is being prosecuted by the very best prosecutors that the country has to offer. But to your point, he is also the beneficiary of tremendous wealth.
Yes.
And he has hired an elite defense team.
We haven't seen the likes of a dream team assembled like this since really OJ. And you're going to hear OJ brought up a lot. The parallels are there, but let's start with the prosecution. As Jason alluded to, the Southern District of New York is populated by very decorated, highly accomplished attorneys. There are some prosecutors in some state courts and things of that nature, which maybe aren't going to be the top flight attorneys in small states and things like that nature. When you're in the Southern District of New York, these are all
the best
stars.
of the best.
These are the best of the best.
And then when you get this assignment to go after such a high profile individual, you are not just the best of the best. You are the 1%,
creme de la creme,
the 1% of the 1%.
You really are. And so the prosecution team has 6 white women that are running the show for the Southern District of New York and the U.S. Attorney's Office there. One of whom has the name Maureen Comey. And if that sounds familiar, it's because this is the daughter of James Comey. James Comey, the former director of the FBI. He was also the former U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. So he has had this exalted position before.
On the one hand, outed Hillary Clinton's communications or I don't know, emails that sort of got her into a lot of hot water, may have cost her the 2016 election, and then immediately turned and went after Donald Trump hard after the election, was fired by Donald Trump, and sort of lives in ignominy.
In certain circles, yes, for sure. Now, Maureen Comey, this is not a case of nepotism. You don't get these jobs because her dad is James Comey. Yeah. She's a very accomplished lawyer in her own right. And so she'll be prosecuting this case on her side along with an entire team. Now, some people are pointing to the racial dynamics of having 6 white women prosecute a black man, and that will come into play when you think about Diddy's team. Diddy's defense team is much more racially and gender balanced. He is led by a man named Mark Agnifilo, who is a very seasoned defense attorney. He's represented lots of famous people, not famous people. He just knows his way around the criminal defense sort of world. Then he's got Tenny Garagos. And if that name sounds familiar, that's the daughter of Mark Garagos, who's the co-host of the Two Angry Men podcast.
That's right. Also not Nepo baby, by the way. Very accomplished.
Very accomplished.
Right. A tremendous defense lawyer.
And Mark Garagos, in a little bit of a sidebar, is involved in this case because he showed up during jury selection. And we have to talk about this briefly. He is the co-host of Harvey Levin's podcast, also on our network, called Two Angry Men, where they talk a lot about the Diddy trial. He is a guy who has represented Michael Jackson. He's represented Chris Brown. He represented Scott Peterson. Mark Garagos is a very seasoned defense lawyer. He showed up to court. The prosecution team didn't love that he was appearing to consult with the defense team. He hasn't been admitted to practice in this particular case. So the prosecution said, we want to remind you, this guy's talking loudly on a podcast and may be impairing our ability to get Diddy a fair trial. And if he wants to continue podcasting, that's fine. But if he wants to do that, he can't participate on this team.
Anyway, we want to talk a lot about the makeup of the prosecution and defense teams, how it's going to play to a jury. And so in doing so, we wanted to bring in somebody who knows a lot more than you and I do about this. Once again, Kirsten Brown-Neal. How are you doing, Kirsten?
Hi, guys. Glad to be back. Very good. How about yourselves?
Well, thank you. So I know Derek's got some questions lined up for you to sort of tease this out.
So I hope you've been sort of listening in. I'm sure you have seen these two teams that are lining up against each other. They're very different. And we wanted to just ask you in an open-ended fashion, how much do you think this all matters? That the prosecution team is led by 6 white women. Diddy's team is sort of more balanced. Do you think that'll play out in any meaningful way?
I think it matters a lot, and I think it doesn't matter at all.
I love that.
Because at the end of the day, it's the strength of the evidence of the case that ultimately is going to either lead in a split verdict, a conviction, or an acquittal. But the optics of all of this matter so much. Every choice in a trial is strategic if you're a good trial lawyer. And as you mentioned, Derek, it is a phenomenal team on both sides. A lot of experience, decades of experience in that courtroom. They all know what they're doing, and every step is intentional. Every single one.
I want to first talk about the gender makeup of the prosecution, because I got a lot of news. Not that these are insanely qualified lawyers, but nevertheless, it's a very purposeful choice by the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District to appoint 6 women to prosecute this case. And I think it runs the risk of making it look more like you're trying to pursue a cause, trying to accomplish something that's bigger than just this defendant himself, rather than go after the defendant based on the crimes for which he's been committed. You're trying to prove a point for all women rather than prove the ultimate point, which is that Diddy committed these crimes.
Right. I mean, they're opening themselves up to criticism for sure. I think, as you guys laid out, perfectly. It is a talented team of prosecutors, irrespective of sex, that are highly experienced. And if things go well for them, this will be lauded as a brilliant decision. And having made a point for women, especially in the courtroom, if anything does not go their way, even just losing one count, I think it's something that they could potentially be criticized for. But I also think what's going to matter is seeing how the workload is divided on both of these teams as the case moves forward. What is so great about having such large teams on both sides is you're going to have subject matter experts, I'm assuming, right? Like there's going to be people on the defense team who have a very specific job. Perhaps, it's cross-examining the victims. It is going after, the prosecution's expert witnesses. And on the prosecution side, you probably have one person who we won't hear from because they're only drafting or responding to motions. And then someone else who is very good at mental health defenses. And I think there's been some alluding to that Diddy will be bringing in some mental health evidence, probably to negate intent. And you probably have one of those prosecutors who is excellent at cross-examining a defense expert about mental health defenses. But it is a really interesting choice. And as you mentioned, that the optics matter so much, and the jury is absolutely going to notice this over the course of this trial.
This is great because now we're getting into how you strategically deploy these teams in different ways. I remember very well from the OJ case, he had that dream team. He had F. Lee Bailey, who is a cross-examination sort of legend, and he cross-examined Mark Furman in a very famous way. He had Barry Scheck, who was an expert on DNA evidence, which was a little bit newer at the time. He did an incredible job sort of picking apart the prosecution's case on the blood evidence. You had Johnny Cochran, obviously, doing his thing the entire way. The head coach, the incredible sort of, criminal defense lawyer all around. So the biggest news piece on the teams is this woman named Nicole Westmoreland has just been added to Diddy's team. She is a black woman who has been added, and it seems like a bit of a chess move to sort of have her sort of play a role in this case in some way. How do you see that playing out in front of the jury? I guess I'm asking, is there a cynicism behind sort of, you have all white prosecutors, we're going to add a black woman to our team? Is there a cynicism that the jury's going to be like, why are you guys playing these games? Just let's have the case.
It's really going to depend on everyone's role and what you're seeing from them. Are there any attorneys in that courtroom that look like props and that they haven't seemed to have done much over the course of what are they estimating, 10-week trial? A jury is going to clock that. But as the case moves along and you start to see what the purpose of each lawyer that's there, I think at the end of the case, the appearance can be very different than how it starts. But that's going to depend on how these, lawyers are utilized. But I imagine each one of them, is there for a very specific purpose. Is it the Karen Reed trial out of Boston?
Yeah.
Where the defense team added one of the jurors from the last trial?
Yes.
How incredible is that for them to get that insight and perspective? And, does that intimidate the prosecution? Because, they know on the other side, you have a former juror. All of it is chess, that is meant to make a point.
I remember you said yesterday, and I don't exactly know how to fit this into what we're talking about, but you said yesterday that you have a particular way of connecting with jurors, women and women of color in particular. That's
Right.
something that, this prosecution team, we don't want to make too fine a point of it. They're great lawyers, and they may be able to connect very well with all jurors across the racial and gender spectrum. But nevertheless, they do run that risk, right? If you have, let's say, 2 black women on that jury who they may not be able to connect with on the same level, would that be a concern of yours as the U.S. attorney, sort of watching this, putting together this dream team of women, but that fit, obviously they're all white and they're all women?
Yes and no, because again, we all know that it was likely purposeful that they did this, but this is also what each of these prosecutors has done is try a case by themselves, where you don't have the benefit of having, other people to connect with the juries or make up for what you might perceive as a deficiency on you. So I imagine that each prosecutor has a tremendous amount of confidence standing on their own, that they understand how to connect with jurors, and primarily through the evidence. It's great if you're building rapport and you want the jury to trust you, but at the end of the day, you want the jury to receive that evidence. And whoever the best people are out of, the storied Southern District, that's who you want on that team.
I think that's great. I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of the team dynamics of having these teams square off against one another rather than two just, bulldog on one side, a hotshot prosecutor on the other. Are egos sort of something that needs to be managed? Have you ever tried cases where you're both alone or maybe on a team? And how does that sort of play in where there might be like turf battles or I should take this witness and so forth? Could that play out in front of the jury, or is that typically just behind the scenes kind of stuff?
If they're all pros, none of it will play out in court. But over a long period of time, tension gets hard to mask if there's any at all. And again, that's something the jury would clock. I cannot overemphasize how much juries notice everything.
Mm.
Everything. I wouldn't call it downtime in a courtroom, but there's always periods where nothing significant is happening. Maybe the attorneys are at sidebar and they didn't dismiss the jury. They're just speaking to the judge at the bench and no one can hear what they're saying. Or it's taking 5 to 10 minutes for the next witness to come into the courtroom. So there's times, and then even when someone, and you have a less interesting, like foundational witness testifying that's not going to grab people's attention, they are clocking everything. They notice tension between both sides. They will notice tension that exists within the teams. And I'm going to guess that both the prosecution and defense have a lead attorney. From the defense perspective, let's be honest too, they probably have consultants. So they have workshopped their defenses and seeing how those might play with juries. And so they should all be on the same page about how this should look. They've told Diddy how he should be looking in court. They have workshopped what he should be wearing. All of that is going to be intentional. And if they're smart, they are not going to let an ounce of tension show through. Do you remember when Kobe Bryant was accused of rape? And I cannot recall his attorney's name, but it was a woman.
Yes.
And she was this tiny little thing, powerhouse attorney at the time. And everything about what they did was so choreographed. He was coming around, opening the door for her, and like all of those things send a message and it's intentional. And this defense team is likely going to be super buttoned up with an understanding of what everything looks like in that courtroom. The prosecution too.
I want to talk about Cassie. She's going to be the lead witness for the prosecution. She is going to lay the foundation for this video of she being abused by Diddy in the hotel. So much of what she says and how she's able to stand up under cross is going to be fundamental to the prosecution's case against him. Crossing her, I would expect, given that she's so important, would be the defense's lead attorney, Mark Agnifilo. But he is a older white man, and he's sort of a hulking guy. Would you expect he would be the one to cross her? Or there's sort of an adage we see in a lot of fictionalized courtroom drama is that you never want to cross that woman with sort of the overbearing man. Or would you expect one of the women on the defense team to go at her?
I think that's largely going to depend on what Cassie is for in terms of the defense perspective. That video is so damning. She is not a victim that you can put on the stand and rip apart for being a liar, not being credible, sort of picking her story apart. Instead, does she become a fact witness? Like she can be that person that talks about Diddy's drug use and alcohol use, and you start to get out what may have been consensual in their relationship. So you're really flipping the dynamic of why she's on the stand, because it can't be you're just a liar and none of these things happen to Miss Ventura, right? So that strategy, I think, will make a difference in who they deploy to cross-examine her. And if in I think we're just speculating who the other victims are. But if there is anybody who appears to be particularly vulnerable and highly credible, having a bulldog attack attorney cross-examine her probably won't play well in front of the jury. And you want someone who can meet the energy of the victim and have a more effective cross-examination.
I think you're exactly right. This is so fraught for the defense team. It is very difficult.
So the difficulty I see for the defense here is that she's doing two things. Number one, she's laying the foundation for the video. And number two, she has to specifically talk about the fact that the reason this video is relevant is because she's claiming, I guess the prosecution is claiming, that she was trying to get out of a freak off at the time. And the freak off, he says there's no real things as freak offs. They were all just consensual and anybody could come and go at any time. So she's got to establish sort of the fundamental aspect of this case, that these freak offs exist and that you were not really free to leave if you wanted to.
But the best thing the defense has going for them is that they were in a long-term, very public, consensual relationship.
That survived
There was
event.
exactly.
Yes.
They continued to be in a
Correct.
relationship even after this event, and I think the defense, it behooves them to really emphasize the point that this was someone who he was in a committed relationship with. The nature and terms of that relationship were whatever those parties decided, and if that involved extra partners, as it occasionally does in some relationships, that's okay. And you're not going to sit up here and kink shame him. He's not on trial for that.
Well, I know, but if I'm the prosecution, I'm saying, sure, they all went into this consensually, but as soon as they tried to get out, there were consequences for trying to leave. That doesn't mean lots of women suffer from sort of a battered woman syndrome. Lots of
Sure.
people stay in abusive relationships, but that doesn't mean they're not abusive, right? I mean,
That's exactly right.
She's so important to everything. Without her, I don't think they have a case.
I think it hinges a lot on her credibility and how she holds up on the stand telling this story.
Yeah.
And I'll be curious to see if the defense sort of suggests or implies what, if any, quid pro quo might have been a part of their relationship. I mean, this is, obviously he's a huge mogul at the time and could hold her career in her hands. So with that in mind, how much of the relationship was quote unquote consensual? How much was she doing as, a reluctant but maybe willing participant in an effort to advance her career? Like you said, Derek, it's really fraught,
Yeah.
and Jason, we're spot on. A domestic violence relationship is all about coercive control, which interestingly is a word that will not be allowed to come in during this trial. But it will be remarkable to see the direct and cross-examination of Cassie and how both sides utilize her.
All right, so we have one more day of jury selection. Hopefully, the judge hopes it's going to wrap tomorrow, although jury selection always seems, in my experience, to go on way longer than anybody anticipates, especially with a pool of this size. And then the expectation is that opening arguments will be on Monday. Kirsten, how long do you anticipate these two parties, these two sides will have for opening argument? Are they going to go on sort of half day each kind of thing to lay out what their trial strategy? Yeah. And then
Probably, and I'm assuming there's been no time limits given to them, and the prosecution has a lot to lay out. And the question will be, how much are they front loading, or is it a less is more strategy where it's a general outline and then they'll let the evidence sort of play out? But I expect lengthy opening arguments from both sides.
Presumably, assuming the judge meets his timeline, Tuesday we would get to see the first witnesses called by the prosecution.
That'd be incredible.
Pretty exciting stuff.
Very exciting.
Kirsten, thank you so much. We can't wait for you to come back and join us again. I'm not even going to
My pleasure.
I'm not even going to ask if you would come back. We're just assuming you're going to come back and join us again. So thank you for everything.
Obviously.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Kirsten.
Take care.
Bye. All right, I want to get to the YouTube questions that have come in, the questions that have come in through YouTube in just a second. I did go back and read the comments that were left overnight. There were a couple points I wanted to hit. Questions about why isn't this trial being broadcast or live streamed? It's federal court. They just don't do it, right?
They just don't do it in federal court. The OJ case was a state case. Obviously, in California, we allow cameras in the courtroom sometimes. It was allowed in the courtroom.
Amber Heard and Johnny Depp, another state case.
In Virginia, it was a state case. The feds just don't do it. We will get those courtroom sketches, which are kind of silly at this point now that we have multimedia efforts, but it's seen as a more sort of somber and serious venue in some ways. I'm not sure if that's an old-fashioned way of looking at the federal court system versus the state court system, but they just don't do it.
Something just occurred to me, not to get lost on this, but with the advent of AI, you could probably, the testimonies are public. You can read it. You could probably plug it in and create an almost identical interpretation of what's happening without any.
Yeah, I mean, Law and Order has also done a rip from the headlines version of the trial already. If you want to watch a fictional version.
The other question is, will the Cassie video definitely be used at trial? Yes, it was. The judge ruled last week that this video would be admitted. It's something that we all anticipated would happen. So the Cassie video will be admitted by the prosecution. My guess is on day one of the trial.
And absolutely. And you'll hear the prosecution try to point out how it was edited. They made some of those arguments before this decision to admit it, but they'll be able to raise that stuff upon its admission as well.
So Emily is asked during the course of this podcast, why did he not hire Joe Tacopina?
It's a good question. I mean, Joe Tacopina is top of his game. He represented, obviously, A$AP Rocky, got him off in that shooting case. There's a lot of good defense attorneys.
There's a lot of good defense attorneys. And Joe Tacopina, deservedly so, got a huge bump from his defense of A$AP Rocky. Agnifilo is incredible. I mean, this guy is unbelievable. You can't go wrong with either of them, but, I think Tacopina was busy up until about 3 weeks
he's a busy
ago.
guy. He's got plenty of clients.
Ryan 4321. What's illegal about that? There's a limit to the amount of baby oil one can own. Talk about the baby oil.
This was the biggest headline that came out after the homes were seized. What they came out with were what they described as over 1,000 bottles of baby oil. Yes, that can be innocuous, but in the context of the allegations they're making about freak-offs and these group sex parties, the prosecution is going to try to make him look like a deviant of some sort who uses a lot of baby oil during these sexual escapades. In and of itself, there's nothing illegal about having baby oil. You can have as much as you want.
Right. And last but not least, Emily, again, Behind the Bar being resurrected is the best thing to happen this decade. Emily has been a long-time fan of Behind the Bar.
We love you, Emily. Thank you for joining in.
Thank you for coming back, and thank you for the shout-out for Behind the Bar. We love doing it. All right, guys, so just to let you know the schedule for the week, we anticipate there's going to be some fireworks tomorrow coming out of the last day of jury selection, that a jury will be impaneled. Again, when a judge really wants something to happen, it's likely going to happen. So we anticipate that by the end of the day tomorrow, we will have a fully impaneled jury. We will know likely the ethnic and gender makeup of that jury. We'll come back and we'll talk to you guys about that and draw whatever conclusions we can. And then I think the plan is to take Thursday and Friday. The courtroom
will be dark on Thursday and Friday.
So we'll probably be dark here as well. But then we'll come back to you on Monday, and it's going to be, I think, fireworks from the very beginning.
When they frame those cases, that is going to be a big, big deal with opening statements. So we'll
Thanks,
stay
Derek.
tuned for that.
Talk to you guys. See ya.